Hello everybody, my name's Mrs. Wade and I have taught English and Maths to the current Year 7s. Sadly only for part of the year due to the lockdown. However, it was a joy to meet everybody every other day and have an English and a Maths session with them. So I'm just going to give you a brief insight into some of the things that we did during our English 1.5 hours every other day. At the start of every English lesson in secondary school, teachers will expect their children to come into the classroom and immediately get out their reading book, and I used to have on my board DEAR. For those of you who don't know what it stands for, it's drop everything and read. So because we had 1.5 hours of English lesson every other day, we used to spend 50 minutes at the start of every lesson reading, which was really, really lovely. Everybody read their own book. You could choose a book from the school library. You could bring a book in from home. And it was a really quiet, settling time to the start of the lesson. At the end of reading your book, we will ask you to do a quiz on your book, which is just a short little test on a program called Accelerated Reader, more of which will be told to you next year. If you're currently in Year 6, you will be very familiar with this and will be used to doing accelerated reader quizzes at the end of every book that you read. Also, every half term, you'll be asked to do a star reading test, and this assesses your reading age and makes sure that throughout the year your reading age is going in the right direction, which is upwards, and that you are reading regularly. For the next 15 minutes of our English lesson, we tended to do a spelling activity. So at the beginning of the week, you would be given a new list of 10 spellings, which mainly revised all the rules that you've learnt in primary. And during this time, it also allowed me to have one-to-one consultations with pupils about work that they had either done as homework or work that they had produced in lesson maybe the day before or the week before, and I just wanted to go over a few teaching points with them on their own. Or I could sit with a group of children and we could talk about their progress in the writing tasks that they've done. So it gives us a chance to have a little bit of a one-to-one with certain children during the time when the rest of the class are doing their spellings. Once the students had obviously written down their new words in their book and had either worked out what they thought the definition was or had looked up a definition in a dictionary and were familiar with the spelling and familiar with what the meaning of the words were, then we used to have just a variety of fun activities for them to get on with, while the teacher had the opportunity to work with small groups of children. And obviously we rotated with those groups of children, so some days you may not have done the spelling activity, which didn't matter because you'll be able to do it on another day. And here are a few of the ideas of just a few things that I used to get my students to do during those 15 minutes. So with all the nitty-gritty things done, like collecting homework, reading, checking people understood what homework was all about, and talking individually to pupils or in groups to pupils, it meant that every day we had a whole hour that was devoted solely to our English lesson, which was a real luxury. And remember, you have an English and Maths lesson once every other day, so it means you have 5 hours of English lesson once a fortnight. At the beginning of every lesson, I would share a text with my students. Now, as you can see, I've got a poem up here, but it could have been a couple of chapters from a book, it could have been an extract from a play, it could be a piece of non-fiction writing. But every day there would be something up on the interactive whiteboard which I would want to share with the rest of my class. And we would read that together. Sometimes I would read it, sometimes the pupils would read it, sometimes it was a play, we'd read it around the room, and then we would analyse that piece of text together. So, here this is a poem called Blessing. The skin cracks like a pod. There never is enough water. Imagine the drip of it, the small splash, echo in a tin mug, the voice of a kindly God. Sometimes the sudden rush of fortune, The municipal pipe bursts. Silver crashes to the ground, and the flow has found a roar of tongues. From the huts, a congregation. Every man, woman, child for streets around butts in, with pots, brass, copper, aluminium, plastic buckets, frantic hands, and naked children screaming in the liquid sun. Their highlights polished to perfection, flashing light as the blessing sings over their small bones. So once we've read the text together and people have asked individual questions or things that initially that they found interesting, or they burning urge to ask a question about something that we've talked about, that we've read, then we would then start to analyse the text with a bit more meaning. So we always have different levels of challenge for the tasks in the classroom. And so a core task, an easier task, might be just to select or find some information from the poem. In this case, I've said, what words can you find in the poem that are associated with water? Then a next level of challenge would be to explore or explain to me in a couple of sentences why there are so many references to water in this little poem. And then a third challenge would be to analyse and connect. Where else could you find, where else other than India could you see this poem applying to? So throughout each lesson, there are various different levels of tasks for you to undertake. And initially, at the beginning of the year, I used to say to everybody, start at the core and work your way through, just so that everybody could see what was expected at each different level. And then towards the end of the short year, I was starting to say to people, if you find that first task very easy and very obvious and you don't want to start there, then move on to the second challenge and move on and make sure that you really challenge yourself by the end of the lesson. And others, and that's perfectly acceptable because we all develop and move on at different levels, would look at the core task and start from there and then hopefully get on to answer one of the exploratory questions afterwards. That was for poetry. You might find if it was a non-fiction text, you might want to go straight into the analytical side of it because it's something about something that you understand, and that's your forte. And so there was no hard and fast rule of where you had to start your answering your questions at the end of every lesson. Once we had looked at the poem from one point of view or one perspective, I would then ask the class to go away and answer some other questions based on the 3 different levels of challenge that I had set at the beginning of the lesson as a class. So you might work on your own. I might say, I'd like you to actually do this as an individual task. I might say, go and work with a partner or your learning partner, or I might say you can work in a small group and go through and analyse the text together. What I'd like you to do now is just after this slide is to just pause the PowerPoint, and you'll see on the next slide 3 different levels of activity. Just have a little look through those in your own time and see whether you could have, how you would have answered some of those questions. Sadly, I'm not there to go through them with you, but you have a little go with yourself, or if you're somebody else from your school is there that you're going to listen to this with them, or your parents are there, you have a little go working out how you would answer these questions yourself. So on the next slide, pause and have a little go for yourself. I hope that was okay and it gave you a little insight into how the sorts of questions and how you'd be expected to answer questions going forward into year 7. Just also to remind you, every week you'll have a homework task which will consolidate work that you have completed in class. This should take you approximately an hour long, but alongside that we will expect you to read for 50 minutes every day, so that when you're also reading in school for 15 minutes at the beginning of your English lesson, you will also accumulate, a good half an hour's reading most days. Also for your homework, we'll expect you to learn those spellings. You might not get tested on the exactly same spellings that you were given at the beginning of the week, but you might get tested on words with the same pattern or associated with the words that you have been learning over the week. So altogether, you'll have a written task, reading every day, and testing on your spellings. I hope that's given you a very, very brief insight. It's very weird looking at a computer screen, talking to a computer screen and not talking to a face of students. So I apologise. It's not how I would normally address a class. But I hope it's given you a little insight into some of the things that you might be asked to do during an English lesson. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy your next year. Bye.